guys, I am Michaela Dice. I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us here on my podcast, Because You Belong Here. The purpose of this podcast is to talk about testimonies. I am a firm believer that your testimony should be someone else's prophecy. So we will be talking with some of my friends and family and people that I love about things that God has done in their lives, and I will be sharing different things about things that God has spoken to my heart and things that I've experienced through Him and His Word. And so I just wanted to tell you, grab a cup of coffee, pull up a chair, and come hang out with us as we go deep, discovering the ways that God has proven His love in tangible ways. I am so excited you're here. We met in a small group at church, and we started having conversations about lots of fun, deep things, and Sherry's the master of conversation starters. And it was so fun to talk about different things and to learn new things about people we just met. One of the beautiful things that I learned about Sherry is that she was adopted as a child, and I have her here because we are starting a series where we're going to be talking with people in adoption land. We're going to be talking to birth parents and adoptive parents and adoptees about the way the Lord has been faithful in their stories. And so I am really excited to have this conversation. And Sherry, just tell us about who you are and about your life and your beautiful family that I just adore so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Michaela. And I just really appreciate the opportunity. I've shared my story to friends and family members, but I've never been in a public forum. And so this is something that's new and very exciting because God's hand has truly, He has shown Himself through my entire life. And it is quite a story to share. But so I am a wife, a mother of 3 adult children. My oldest is married and has given me 2 wonderful grandsons. And I just retired from teaching. I taught elementary school for over 30 years. And so that's kind of my life in a nutshell. But yes, I was adopted from birth and have, an interesting story to tell.
Yeah. So when did you always know you were adopted?
Yes, I did. I did. And I'll back up and just share this. My adoption was a closed private adoption. My parents at the time lived in Florida and went to a large Baptist church. They were not able to conceive a child of their own. So within their church, some of their friends came to them and said, "Look, we know that you're looking into adoption. We know a family with a 16-year-old expectant mother who's looking for someone to adopt her child." So that's kind of how it all came together. So but I always knew, that I was adopted. My parents did a beautiful job of pouring into me and saying, "Hey, you were chosen, you were loved, you were meant to be with us," So just an ideal childhood. And so I never really felt the need or the desire to find my birth mother. I thought about her, but never, felt that a real desire until I was a little older. I was married and had my first child, and the Lord just really put my birth mother on my heart. And I remember praying, saying, "Lord, if this is from you, open the doors, and if it's not, close the doors, and I'll just make peace with this and move on." So the first thing that I did is I went to my parents and I asked for their blessing. And that was super important to me, that if they had any kind of hesitation or reservations, I would have been fine to just leave things, as they were. But that they did give me their blessing. And I also told them, I said, "I want you to understand, I don't feel like anything is missing in my life. I don't feel like my life is incomplete. It's just that now that I have a family of my own, number one, I'm curious about my medical history. And the second thing was, I want my birth mother to know that she made the right choice. I've
Yeah.
had a beautiful life, and it was because of her sacrifice that I've been able to be where I am."
Mm-hmm.
So my parents contacted their old church friends and said, "Hey, do you guys remember the name of the family that Sherry's birth mother stayed with when she was pregnant with her?" So they gave us the names of the family. And this was about 27, 28 years ago. It was before the internet. So I'm kind of showing my age. But so I searched a database and came up with a list of, phone numbers for people with this particular name. And I just started making phone calls.
Yeah.
And the very last phone call that I made was the family that my birth mother had stayed with. And so, it was a pretty emotional conversation. And I didn't want to reach out to my birth mother directly. I didn't know where she was in life. So
Hmm.
so I asked this woman to please, be my mediator on my behalf. And so she reached out to my birth mother to let her know, hey, your daughter's looking for you. And it was probably about 3 or 4 hours later. I think my birth mom needed some time to just kind of digest. But
Yeah.
then she called me on the phone, and
3 or 4 hours is pretty quick.
it was very quick. I was shocked. I was not
Wow.
expecting it to be that
Yeah.
quick. But the whole process really took less than 2 weeks from the
Mhm.
time that I made up my mind that this is something I want to do till the time that I was actually talking to my birth mother, because the Lord said, "This is the time." And He just opened up all the
Mm.
doors.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So then how did you meet her? Like, did you guys have like a public place? Like, did you go to her house? How did this go?
Well, yeah. So at first, we just talked on the phone, didn't even talk about meeting initially, but we started writing letters, sending pictures through the mail. Again, this was before, you could just send it
Yeah.
through email. So we just kind of got to know each other that way.
Hmm.
And it was at least a month, I believe, or so after we had been talking for a while, where we just finally said, let's get together. So I invited her to my home, and she came with her husband. And it was, you see on TV these really just super emotional reunions, and people are crying, and it wasn't that way for me. Like, we already had a bond, but it truly was getting to know a stranger,
Hmm.
and it wasn't awkward, and things fell into place very quickly, and we just began to just really, bond quickly. But it wasn't one of those super emotional things that you might see on television, right?
Yeah.
So, and the interesting thing is, one of our first conversations with my birth mom is, she said, "Well, are you interested in meeting your father?" And I said, "I have no idea. I've never thought about that." And so I did. I thought about it. I prayed about it, and I said, "Sure." See, she was from a very small town in North Carolina. Everybody knew everybody, right?
Hmm.
So she said, "Hey, I still know, where he is and how to get in touch with him." So in a very short period of time, I had a phone conversation with my birth father. And then, before I really even knew what was happening, I I realized that I had half brothers and sisters, grandparents, great grandparents, aunts, uncles,
Hmm.
cousins, just the whole gamut. And it was just like, wow, how do I wrap my head around this entire family that I never even knew existed?
Yeah.
So it was a lot at one time. But it was pretty remarkable.
Yeah. And how, so in that moment, when you find out you have siblings, my question is always, what does that feel like? Because if we were to find out that my children had siblings, my adopted kids, like they
Mhm.
had like I want to make sure that I approach that the right way, but also what did that feel like to know, because we have conversations and my kids ask me questions and they say things
Sure.
like, what, why would they keep other kids and not me? Or, like
Right.
those questions. Like what did that feel like for you?
Yeah, and that was certainly, something that I had to work through and deal with, because my mother had another daughter who was my half sister. My father had four children after
Hmm.
me. And in fact, he had married, you know, the, the he'd gotten married and then had these children. And so it was
Hmm.
kind of like, well, why was that different than what happened to me, even though I knew that
Yeah.
my birth family or my birth parents were very young. They were just 16 and 17 years old,
Hmm.
at the time. But yeah, it was neat. It was very interesting to, and I found pictures, I saw pictures of them before I actually met them, but I've met all of
Yeah.
them in person. And so it's just funny to kind of see maybe a little bit of resemblance, here and there, some things that you have in common. But it was something that I had to reconcile within myself of, wow, I was the one that was given up for adoption, and yet my mother and father chose to keep their other children. And it's just, it's something that you just have to work through and come to terms with, and just understand. As a believer, I know that the Lord had a plan for my life from the beginning, and this was part of his plan. And it truly was what was best for me. And God knew that.
Hmm.
So at some point, you have to just let go of those, other feelings of, well, why didn't I stay? Why was I given up
Yeah.
for adoption?
Hmm. And ultimately, what kind of led to that? Like, I don't know how to ask that question. Like, what did you like? How did you pray through that? Like, how did the Lord kind of walk through those feelings with you, if that makes sense?
There was so much else going on as far as learning my birth mother, learning my birth father, and my entire family. There was just this plethora of emotions, that I was
Yeah.
dealing with, good, bad, and ugly. That was just one part. That was
Hmm.
just one part of it. And I think I was able to reconcile that logically just by saying they were young. They were still in high school. When they went to their parents basically made the decision for them, that my birth mother
Right.
was going to go move in with a family friend out of state so that
Hmm.
she could give birth to me and then come back and finish high school. And so that was kind of part of it. And then it was just like, well, they were a little bit older when they had their next, when they had their other children. So I was kind of able to work through that logically. But also I saw a Christian counselor for a while,
Hmm.
not just specifically for that, but just to deal. There's no grid for this, you
Right.
know. And so just a godly counselor who just gave such good advice was able to help me work through a lot of that. And then also a lot of praying of specifically, Lord, help me to know who I am in you, because there's
Yeah.
almost an identity. I mean, maybe crisis is a little extreme, but all that I'd ever known was my mom and dad, and that I was very secure in
Yeah.
that life and who I was. And suddenly there's an
Hmm.
entire birth family with so many different stories and things that it's just like, well, I'm a part of them too.
Yeah.
So how do you mesh that together? And so again, it was just a lot of, God, show me who I am. Tell me who
Yeah.
I am through your word, through
Hmm.
through through prayer. Tell me the plan. You said in Jeremiah 29:11, you have plans for me. Just confirm
Hmm.
that in my heart and in my mind so that I can settle this within myself. So it is a process, and it does take
Yeah.
some time. And fortunately, I was in my 20s before I, found my birth family. And so I think that was beneficial too. I had a child of my own, and so I think it
Fascinating.
gave me a
Yeah.
little bit of a different perspective, maybe,
Hmm.
than if I had found them when I was younger. So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Because I mean, I feel that way as a mom. Like,
Yeah,
I feel I see my situation differently as a mom because
absolutely.
now I have this context for my my mom who is my stepmom, but she's my mom. Like she raised me. And
Right,
so
right.
when you're a teenager, you have these views of what life could be like if you lived with the other people or whatever. And you like go
Yes.
through this whole crisis in your head of like,
You
my life would
do.
be so different. But then
Yes.
now as a grown up, like as an adult and as a mother, like you see the context for what a real mom
Yes.
is that like my mom, she bandaged me, she cried with me, she
Right.
pep talked me when I was going to be doing something big. She came to all my games and she was
Yeah.
there when my first boyfriend broke up with me, or whatever those contexts are, like those stories that
Yes.
aren't just stories, right? Like they are connectors and they are
Oh,
bonders. And
yes.
like I totally, totally understand what you're saying. Cause I like
Yeah.
as a mom, like I remember when we were adopting our first son, he was in the hospital and he was in the hospital for like a week. Like we met him and he had RSV the day that we met him and we didn't know like how sick he was, but he ended up in the hospital the next day. His foster mom took him to the pediatrician and they put him in an ambulance and sent him to the ER.
Hmm.
And so our whole first week of knowing him ever as our son and being parents, even though he wasn't living with us yet, was we were going to the hospital and we were
Hospital.
loving on him and we were holding him and like other people were making decisions for the kid that we knew, like for this baby, he was 8 months old and like we knew we were his parents, but we couldn't make decisions for his life because we had just met him. Like it's
Wow.
so weird to think back on that like 12 years later, like
Yes.
it's so bizarre. But
Yeah.
I remember calling my mom on the interstate in Tucson, driving to the hospital to go see my son. And I'm crying and I'm like, I am so sorry for all the flack that I gave you. You have done so much for me. And like knowing that there was other people trying to make decisions for my life. And like,
Right.
it's like this whole realization when you become a mom
Full
where you're like,
circle moment.
it doesn't matter that I didn't give birth to this child. It doesn't matter that
Right.
this person didn't give birth to me,
Yep.
but this is my parent. Like these are my parents.
Yeah.
And to have that whole different perspective where you can appreciate a birth mother in a whole different way that isn't resentful and it isn't heartbreaking or
Yeah.
bitter because you stepped into this role as a mom
Mm,
that you
hmm.
you you now have a new context for that narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely. And as far as resentment is concerned, that's not anything I ever felt for my birth mother. I guess because I realized she was a 16-year-old girl. And as most 16-year-olds do, we sometimes make poor choices, as
Yeah.
teenagers. And that she was pulled out of her high school. She was uprooted from her home and her
Mhm.
family and her friends and was going to, you know, go stay with another family, grow this baby, go through labor and delivery, knowing full well that she was never going to be a part of that child's life. And so I think that there was more compassion than resentment.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that having adoptive parents who are cautious with that conversation and who are intentional, maybe cautious is the right word,
Intentional is a good
intentional
word.
with that, because I know we try to be very careful. Like we're very truthful
Yeah.
with their stories. Like this is what happened, and some of my kids have stories that aren't pretty stories.
Yeah.
And then one of my kids has a story that like I will always, anytime I speak about her birth mother, like she was an angel. I know what she went through was hard. And I mean, if you're listening to this, I love you. Like she is
I
just
love
this,
that.
like, I can't wait till the day that we get to like meet and hug and like lavish over this relationship that we have been blessed with because of
Hmm.
this hard situation that she went through.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and what a blessing it is. And that's what we're very like intentional to talk about. Like you were so loved before you came. Every
Yeah.
decision that was made was because you were so loved by God, by your birth family, and by us. Like you were chosen in a whole crazy way. And I mean, even with the boys, like we have those conversations with them. Decisions were made that weren't good, and they wouldn't be safe for you to be part of that.
Yes.
And some like that's one of the things I talk to people about adoption is like adoption isn't God's plan. Like he never created families to be broken, right? Like
Correct. Right.
it's not something that was initially like, oh yeah, people are going to adopt and they're going to create these beautiful families and like that was not his design.
Right.
Bottom line, and that's a really hard truth as an adopted family.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also what an honor is it to be part of a story where he creates beautiful things out of broken things.
Oh, yes. The redemption, the
Hmm.
reconciliation, just, yeah, it is incredible.
Yeah. And the ripples that go out. Like whenever our daughter was born, we were in the hospital with her and we got to have conversations with nurses who were dealing with infertility, who were considering adoption, like
Oh,
all this different stuff that like we got to be part of that. And even when we gave birth to Evangeline in the hospital, we're like sharing this story with people because she was our first biological kid. And like now we're friends with some of the nurses because they were like, you guys are amazing. I can't believe God did this in your story. And like the ways that we can bring God glory through these hard things that just, there's a lot of times where we're like, this makes no sense. How did he think that I was okay with this? Like, how did he think that I was
right.
going to be okay doing all the things that apparently he said I was going to do? I don't know. I don't know, but here we are. Like,
Well, and I think it's amazing that your children have different stories, and so that's a delicate position for you, as a mom to
mhm,
navigate and to look at each child as an individual and dealing with feelings of abandonment or rejection or um, and so I applaud you for being sensitive to each one of your children and their needs and their specific needs and like you said, being intentional about pouring into them whatever it is that they need to
yeah,
be assured that you're loved and we sought you out and chose you. You are supposed to be here. You
yeah.
are mine. That's
Mhm.
that's
Well, and we always tell
priceless.
them they ask questions about parts of their story that I'm like, you're just not ready to hear that. And so we tell them all the time. Like, I don't even know how many times I've said this to my kids, but we talk about Corey Ten Boom and her dad telling her about the luggage and how that may
Yes.
have been a completely different conversation talking about, sexual sin or what I think that
Right.
like talking about that. And he said, here, hold this luggage. And it was too heavy. And he says, it's because you're not meant to hold that yet. That
Yes.
is my burden to bear for you.
Beautiful.
And so we tell them that. And like, as you get older and you get more mature, and like there's different aspects of this, like we will unpack this suitcase together,
Yep.
one thing at a time, because I'm not going to put this whole amount of weight on you when you're not ready for it. And
Yeah.
as a parent, like that's my job to protect your heart. And that's what that means. And just calling it what it is, like it was ugly and I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but I can't, like, I'm not going to tell you everything right now.
And I think it's so important that you're honest with them about, this is what I know, this is what I'm able to share with you at this point.
Mhm.
Do they seem okay with the fact of, okay, I'm just going to have to accept not knowing at this particular moment
It
when you
depends on
tell
the
them?
day.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
We
that's
deal
fair.
with, there is some like mental health issues that we have inherited that we are working through spiritually and with psychiatrists and stuff. And I think that probably feeds the conversation more than just a flat conversation.
Mm,
You know what I mean? Like some OCD and some obsessive thoughts and intrusive
sure.
thoughts that come as part of that. So the conversation can be a little shaky sometimes.
Yeah.
But I mean, we navigate it as best we can. And we always like pray through it. And like, when you're ready to hear, we'll tell you. Or like, we do have those conversations in a different light sometimes.
Hmm.
Because sometimes we don't talk about it for months. And then other times we're doing stuff and all of a sudden it's like, hey, what was my birth mom's name? And I'm like, but nobody was talking about this. I don't
Where did
know.
that come from? Where did
I don't know what's happening.
right, right. Yeah, right. And
Pops out
that's
of
very
nowhere.
normal, though, I know, because,
Mhm.
you've got your own life, you're living your own life,
Yeah.
but there are these lingering thoughts that are in the back of your for whatever reason, may surface at random times, and I think it's a great thing that your children are comfortable enough to be able to approach you and ask, and that's the way it was for me,
Mm.
and that's huge. It's huge
Yeah.
in feeling safe and feeling secure, and just like your podcast, you belong here.
Yeah.
It's
Hmm.
your children knowing you belong here.
Yeah. And that's the environment we want to create of we don't tolerate bullying. We don't tolerate extra things. Like there are behaviors that we don't tolerate, but your feelings are always welcome. And we tell them that all the time. Like your feelings are welcome. Some of your behaviors may not, but we want you to talk to us. Like trying to make sure that they always feel safe to talk to us because
So good.
I feel like you can get in some shady places really quick
Yes.
when someone tells you you're not allowed to feel what you feel.
Right.
Like, I don't want to play that game.
Yeah. Yeah. No. No. Well, and I know your children are still young, but have you experienced any? Have there been any issues between your adopted children and now having a biological child of your own, kind of the biological versus adopted?
So I don't know. One of our kids just expressed something a couple weeks ago
Okay.
about it. We were in kind of a mental health crisis. And so it's hard to say, is this something you've been thinking about? Or is this something that just arose out of like anger? But it was really the first time that they talked about it in the light of biological and adopted. So our third one, she was the baby the longest because it's the first two are 20 months apart. The oldest one had just turned 2 when we adopted the second one. So we didn't really
Wow.
have like a infancy break because then our second
Right.
one started crawling like 2 weeks after he moved in with us. So it was chaos and I cried all the time. It was a lot. But then there is a like the third one was born, like we got her in the hospital and she was born 2 weeks before our second one turned 4. So we had like this whole
Okay.
4 year gap. But then
Yes.
after
Yes.
that, we couldn't get pregnant. We moved. So in Alabama, you don't have to have an agency for adoption. And so it was a simpler process and
Okay.
a less expensive process than it is in South Carolina. And we moved here and we were like, we can't adopt again because we paid, I think overall between all three of our adoptions, we paid less than like $6,000 for all three of them total. Like
Oh my
bills
goodness.
because of the states we lived in and the processes we went through. But then we moved to
Mhm.
South Carolina and it's like $50,000, 40 minimum,
Oh my
because you have like all these other rules and agencies and all these things. And I mean,
goodness.
we've got so many friends who went through it, but we were just like, we don't really feel like it's what we're supposed to do. So in that process, there's four. Evie was born 4 months shy of 5 years, like 4 months shy of Ariel's fifth birthday.
Okay. Okay.
And so I think that has been the harder transition. Like it wasn't necessarily because she was biological or adopted as much as it was, why do we have to have a baby?
Just, yeah, right.
Like, we didn't
Starting
need a
over
baby, did
again.
we? Like they adore her. I mean, she's amazing. She is so fun. And they
Yeah.
love her so much. But we do have moments where they're like, I don't have as much of your attention as I used to, or you don't hug me enough. Like
That's
you're
great.
always holding her, but you don't hug me. And I'm like, just come on over and give me a hug. Like, I'm here. My arms are open. Like,
And, truly that sounds typical,
exactly.
whether you're biologically why, whether you're a biological child or adopted child, that's just the nature of siblings,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. And
Um,
I think that like that is the thing is it hasn't necessarily been about biological. It
yeah.
was the maybe the opposite while I was pregnant because I think I told you this one day. We were dealing with some things where our oldest was really just we don't know if he was imagining people making jokes about him being adopted or if it was actually happening. We don't really have full context on that because of
Mhm.
mental health stuff.
Okay.
He was saying a lot of things. And so we talked a lot about adoption makes you extra special because even though something bad happened, like God said, no, this is not the plan for this child.
That's
And you
right.
were chosen. And like we brought you in and we loved you. And like, you are extra special. And so while I was pregnant with Evie, I remember I was standing at the top of the stairs and he was talking to me. Like they used to talk to my belly all the time. And it was so sweet. He was like, oh, Evie, we just love you so much. It's okay that you're not adopted. You'll still be special too. And I was like,
Oh,
oh, you do hear me when I talk. Like
Michaela, what a beautiful testimony.
it was so sweet because it was just like, okay, okay. Like as a parent in any situation, adoptive or not, like question every decision you ever make. Every
Oh,
word that comes out of your
absolutely.
mouth. Every day you get to the end of the
Absolutely.
day and you're like, I don't think that anybody learned anything that I said
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
And then the moments like that happen and you're like, oh,
Oh no. Oh no.
okay, maybe
Yeah.
we're doing better than we thought.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing. And going back to what you were saying is that your son, you don't know if it was something that he was just, coming up with in his head, or if it was things that other people really did say. That's something that I was thinking about before our interview is, even in the best case scenario, like what your children are in, the way that I was raised, of just feeling so grounded and deeply rooted, that there and my parents had a biological child when I was 10.
Oh,
So, and I can't remember if you and I discussed that or not, but
I don't think I knew
um
that.
yeah, so, it was pretty amazing, but there was never any partiality. There was never any favoritism. It was just
Hmm.
always just like, well, that's cool. Now there's two of us, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But there were some outside voices that came, that I remember. An adult man, they just don't think. They're just careless with their words,
Yeah.
and some of it really is just ignorance. But he told me one time, he said, I can't believe that your parents love you just as much as they love their real son.
What? Somebody said that?
Somebody said that. An adult. Well, exactly. And so you're like, I don't even know how to respond to that, and I remember when I was little, an older woman coming to me saying, you need to thank your lucky stars that your mom and dad took you in when no one else wanted you.
Excuse me.
Well, exactly. Now, my parents did overhear that, and boy, they swooped me up and they set things straight.
Good. Yeah.
So, and I was, because I wouldn't have ever told them that she had said that. And then even a friend, and you hear these things periodically throughout your life, but even a friend who said, I just really feel bad for you because, your biological parents didn't want you, and so you don't really have a real family. I'm like, I don't? Well, yeah, I do. you know.
Yeah.
So, but my point is, even in the best case scenario, in the best case situations, when you've got loving parents who are pouring into their adopted
Hmm.
children, there are outside voices, and Satan will use those as much as he can to drive a wedge.
Yeah.
And so, just a word for those adoptive parents is that it's got to be ongoing, that you're consistently pouring into your child, because you might not know, you might not hear what someone else has said to them, you
Yeah.
know and you just continually reaffirm, your love, and you are extra special, and we sought you out, we chose you,
Hmm.
and also continually affirming who they are in Christ. This is who
Yeah.
God says you are.
Yeah.
God says that you are beloved. God says that you are loved and chosen, and that He has plans for you. All the
Mhm.
things. And that way, if there are any of these little seeds that are trying to be planted into your children's mind, it's going to fall on rocky soil and never take root,
Yeah.
because those other plants, the other good seeds that have taken root and are growing, will just drown them out.
Yeah. That's really good.
So, so yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so good. I'm so glad we're having this conversation.
Oh, it's I love it. It's definitely a special it's a special conversation for me, and to talk to someone who, you know, has adopted children and has a biological, it's just really neat because I feel understood, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's encouraging for me as a parent that has adopted kids and a biological child, like
Yeah.
to talk to people who have grown up already, you know, like that is my hope is like that I can see hope
Yes.
through other people. And I mean, that's the whole purpose of my podcast is like I talk
Yeah.
to people because I always tell people like your testimony is someone else's prophecy. And that's what I want to hold
Mhm.
on to is the hope of adoptees who've been through it and they come out on the other side and they're still grateful and they're still, you know, like you're such a beautiful person. And like you're raising beautiful people and you
Oh,
know,
thank
it's
you.
just it's such an inspiration and encouragement to me as a mom to be able to see what can be on the other side. Because right now we've got a middle schooler and I don't care if he's adopted or not, like that's hard.
That's middle school stuff. Middle school stuff.
What
I
the
don't care who
heck?
you are. You're exactly right. You're exactly
So
right.
much.
Oh,
Just, you know,
and
the whole
I
world.
think my situation for the most part has been, from somebody on the outside looking in, they would say it's ideal. I was placed with just the most amazing parents that a girl could ask for, who I just love and adore. I got to know my entire birth family, and they accepted me, and I visit with
Mhm.
them periodically, and that kind of thing. And so it's just kind of the best case scenario, but not to sugarcoat anything, because there were some very difficult times, because like you said, this was not God's original plan.
Mhm.
And there's so many layers, and there's so many complex feelings and emotions that there's no grid for. So I'm so thankful to be, to where I am, but I don't want anyone to think that the whole process was just easy,
Yeah.
because even in the best cases, in the best case scenario, it's hard. There
Yeah,
are times that are
absolutely.
very, very difficult. And you know that.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, what are some ways that you have learned, like things that you maybe knew about the Lord, that as you've walked through this process and He has walked through it with you, like what have you found to be true in new ways, like where He's just come alive to you in new ways through this process?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. You know, I remember having a little bit of a faith crisis not too long after I found my biological family, because it had never dawned on me before, but I thought, I believe what I believe because that's what my parents taught me. If I had been raised by a different family who believed differently, then that's what I would believe.
Yeah.
So, how do I know that what I believe is true?
Mm,
Was I just, randomly placed in, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I
yeah.
remember being in my backyard, and my oldest was about 2 at the time. She was running around in the backyard, and I started thinking of all these things, and all of these thoughts started crowding in, and it was just like, suddenly, you don't really know. You don't know
Yeah.
the truth. And I could feel myself almost beginning to panic, almost like a panic attack coming on. And I've never heard the Lord audibly, but just as clear as I have ever heard him speak to me, when I've got all of these thoughts just running in my head, I heard him say, "Be still
Mm,
and know that I am God."
so good.
And the voices, there was complete peace. It was just all of the thoughts in my head were silenced.
Hmm.
And it was just like, wow. And, and I didn't stop there though, because I did want to make my faith my own. And so I really started doing some reading the Bible from a different perspective. Like, what if this was the very first time I'd ever heard this? You know, what if I'm
Yeah.
like a child reading this for the first time? And
Hmm.
that shed a whole new light. But I also started doing some research of how was the Bible even compiled? How did it come to be? How was it preserved through the years? And what about history? Is there anything in secular history that lines up with what the Bible says is true? And the more that I dug, the more that it solidified my faith. And
Yeah.
my faith became my own. And I think about in Jeremiah where it says, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart." And that's exactly where I was. And I can stand here now saying, I am 100% convinced that the Bible is the word of God, and it is true, and it is reliable, and that is what I build my life around, is
Hmm.
my God, my faith, my personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So that was a real turning point. And another thing, because you had asked me previously about if there was any particular scripture or anything that kind of
Hmm.
stood out to me, and one that really, and it's one that's fairly familiar to most people, but is Psalm 139, 13 through 16, that says, "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." Now, this next little part is the one that just came alive for me. "My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be."
Mm.
It was it was just like, you know what? Maybe I was a surprise to my birth parents. I was no surprise to God. He says right here, my frame was not hidden from him. He's the one
Man.
that put me together. And it was so real and so personal that when the enemy starts saying, "You're a mistake, nobody really wanted you," I was like, "No, you're wrong." Because
Yeah.
this is what my God has to say about me.
Mm. Oh, so good.
So that's been a lot of the things that I've stood on. And of course, Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans that I have for you." And in my mind, I thought, well, if the Lord knows the plans that he has for me, then that means he knew I was coming. I wasn't a mistake.
Right.
He already had plans for me. And so again, being able to fight the enemy and his lies with the word of God,
Yeah.
and saying, "You know what, that's a thought that you just put in my head, but you're wrong, because this is what my God has to say."
Hmm.
And so that's been, I mean, the best weapon for me in
Yeah.
battling lies and negative thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. That's so good. One of the things that I think that, like, when I hear that verse and whenever I think about people saying, like, oh, you were just an accident and your parents didn't want you, so you're adopted. Like,
Right.
the truth of the matter is, after 10 and a half years of infertility, I have learned a lot about what that process looks like. And like, even in the most ideal situation, you know exactly when the time is, you've done everything to be as healthy as possible. There is still only a 30% chance that you're going to get pregnant. Like, and that is with minute planning to
Wow.
the minute of
Right.
knowing your body and knowing
Yes.
all of the things. Like 30%.
So who's the giver of life? Right.
Right? Yeah. And even we went through IVF and like it's still that same process. Yes, we did some things. Yes,
Yeah.
we went through and there was science
Yep.
involved and there were doctors.
Sure.
But I know a lot of friends who have had failed IVF because
Yep.
different things and like health factors or unexplained reasons. And like for a child to grow in my womb is a miracle. Like regardless of what that looks like, whether you did IVF, whether you had IV, like
Sure.
infertility,
Right.
it doesn't matter,
For sure. Right.
you know? And the adoption agency we went through for Ariel's home study, they had a thing. I just remember the first time I ever went into that office, they had a plaque up by the door so you could see it every time you walked out the door. And it said, no matter how it comes to you, motherhood is a miracle. And I was just
Mm.
like, so good. Because I mean, we were still deep in the midst of infertility. And
Oh,
like all of our children, if like there's just so much blessing
yeah.
in the places where, yeah, it's hard. Adoption is messy. And that's just the nature of something that wasn't supposed to be broken, right?
That's
Like
right.
there's
That's right.
there's not anything you can do about that.
Yep.
But motherhood is a miracle. And that's it.
So
You know?
good.
Yeah.
So
Like
good.
these children had to be born and they were miracles,
Yeah.
you know? They're not accidents.
No.
Mm.
And I think that that's, you bring up a good point. It makes me think another thing that I think is important for adopted children to know is that you were not our second choice. You
Yeah.
know, maybe we were not able to conceive on our own, but that doesn't mean we just settled for, you know, for you, you know, or, you were not adopted out of pity just because we knew you needed a home and we figured we'd just be your rescuers. Kids need to know you are loved just as much as if you were our biological child. God knew that you would be our child and that you
Yeah.
would come to us through adoption. We just didn't know it then, but we know it
Hmm.
now.
Yeah. Yeah. You were never our second choice. You were always God's first choice for us.
That's exactly right. But that is one of the many lies that that they
Yeah.
think. Well, they would have preferred to have had their own. It wasn't supposed to be me, and they just settled for, and that's so not true. It's so not true.
Yeah. Yeah. Our story wouldn't be what it is. And it
Right? And
wouldn't
then
be bringing glory to God. And, like there's so much
yeah,
we talk all the time about, like, just however this happens, let there be no way that I can take the glory for this.
yes.
And that's what my husband and I, we pray in a lot of different situations. Like, this doesn't make sense. There's no way this is going to happen on our own. And I think it backfires sometimes where we're like, Lord, let this be nothing that we can take the glory for. Like, let this only be you. And then later we're like, why did we say that? Like, this is really hard.
Yeah, I've really put a lot of work into this.
Yeah, like Pastor Chitty says, you have hard things because you ask for hard things. Like,
Yes. Be
why don't you
careful
stop
what you
punching me in the
pray
face, okay?
for. Right.
Yeah,
That's so good though. I love your heart, and it's in the right place. It's exactly where it needs to be.
it's wild in these streets. It's crazy.
What an
But
adventure. What a
it is an
great
adventure.
adventure. Yep.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And really, like, I wouldn't be sitting here in this chair having these conversations if it hadn't been for the way the Lord had led us.
Yeah.
Like my heart for testimonies is because I've seen him working. I've been in the waiting rooms where I have watched him do things that didn't make sense to me. And, you know, then coming out on the other side saying, oh, yeah. And I've been having a lot of conversations recently with people about talking about your testimony when you're in the middle of it instead of when you're on the outside of it.
Mm,
And like I'm writing a book and it's called Tangible Truth. And it's all about like the way the Lord becomes like the Lord's character becomes tangible to you through the way he's worked.
mm.
And that's part of the whole thing is starting to recognize who he is in the middle of those places, not
Yes.
just talking to people when they're already on the other side,
That's
because
good.
there's so much value in that.
Oh,
But
yeah.
if you can learn to identify his working in the middle of those places
While it's
before you
happening.
come out, like
Yep. Yep.
it's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
to
Wow.
experience and to say, this is hard, but I get to experience him in this way that I wouldn't have experienced him if I wasn't in the middle of this.
Mm.
And I think that's what adoption has done for us because it's never ending, right? Like this whole
Right.
conversation is
Right.
constant because
Yeah.
this is our life. Like this isn't just a season of life. This is our forever story now. And so learning that's I think that's why the Lord led me to have these conversations about adoption with people because I've always talked to people of saying, "Oh, we went through this and I felt the Lord." When I look back, I see, "Oh, he was there doing these things." Instead of saying, "Listen, we're in the middle of some really hard things."
Right in the middle. Yeah.
But the Lord is being faithful and he's bringing us people and community and life in
Yeah.
ways that we would have never gotten to know this part of the Lord,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and like just identifying in the middle of it. And that's my heart is to be able to talk people through that process and help them learn to identify him
Oh, that's so good.
in the
And then what a
hard
peace
places.
that brings. What a peace that brings that
Hmm.
even in the middle of the storm, it's like, you know what? God's working. He's good. Everything he does is good. This is, you know,
Yes.
this is going to be okay.
And
Yeah.
so the conversation I just had with someone, we were talking about his goodness. And I think that episode's going to come out a week before this one. So the one that I just released, she was talking about the goodness of the Lord. And that was part of what we talked about is like everything about him is good. So nothing that he ever does can ever be anything other than that.
Yeah.
Like he is love and everything else just overflows from that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And,
So,
and you know, it goes back to, you know, his thoughts are higher than ours. We can't fathom why he's doing certain things that are supposedly good or that he will work together for our
yeah,
good because we're just not capable of understanding,
right.
you know?
Yeah. So beautiful
What a
to be
ride.
part of that. Like, what is it called whenever they take like there's broken pottery and they put the gold in it? Like, it has a
Oh,
name,
yes.
something.
Oh, I can't, I
I don't know
can't
what it's called.
remember.
I'll figure it out whenever we're not talking anymore. But like that to me is what adoption is that he takes these things and we can, I mean, from my experience and from your experience, and probably all of the people that I'm going to talk to about this conversation,
Yeah.
is it all comes from that place where he didn't want that.
Yeah.
But when we approach it from this perspective, this point of view of like you were talking about, finding your identity in him and not in abandonment or
Yes.
rejection or being different than your birth family. Like he is so good. And like you are beautiful and you are this beautiful person and you get to share these stories with people and encourage people who don't know who they are because they were adopted and they're in the middle of this crisis of saying, I don't know who I am because I don't know where I come from.
Right.
But that isn't who we are.
Right.
Like I can say, I know where I come from and I know that's not who I am, you know?
Exactly.
And so I love that you said that. And I appreciate that so much because it is that like the beautiful gold that puts the pottery back together and it becomes this beautiful work of art and this
Oh,
masterpiece
oh yeah.
that only God could have designed.
Yep. Like you said, it goes back to he gets all the glory. You
Yeah,
can't make this stuff up, you know? You can't make it
amen to
up.
that. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you so much. I just adore you. I'm so glad we got
Oh
to have
my
a
goodness.
conversation.
Oh, Michaela, I've been so looking forward to this, and I just think you're incredible. And I so love what you're doing and
Thank
what you're
you.
promoting. And thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. I'm so honored that you would be here and share your story with us in this way.